Hello, this is your girl Soroya here, and this is Kintsugi Talks episode 7. Today, we're going to be talking about Jesus and therapy. Now, I feel that this is going to be one of the more important videos that I do for this season of how many episodes will be in this season of my podcast, especially when it comes to the whole bridging the gap part of science and psychology along with spirituality, Christianity, and having faith. So that is what I will be covering today in this episode. But before I get into it, to those that have been supporting and listening and have been leaving reviews and things of that nature, thank you very much. I appreciate it so much. If you aren't subscribed or aren't following the podcast to receive notifications when I get new episodes, please feel free to do so. This podcast is available on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. Hopefully in the future, it'll be available on more platforms. And thank you again for the support, and thank you for those who will be tuning in to today's episode. So, without further ado, let's get started. Now, in the Bible, there isn't a lot of talk of therapy, but there is talk of counseling. And I wanted to start off this episode by giving the definition of the two different terms, therapy and counseling. Like I said in the last episode, I love finding out the definition of words. I think they're super important to gain knowledge on things that you're trying to learn about. So first is the definition of therapy. Now, therapy is medical treatment of impairment, injury, disease, or disorder. So therapy can be for something physical, and it could be for something mental, something that people can't usually see right off the bat. Now, the definition of counseling is professional guidance of the individual by utilizing psychological methods, especially in collecting case history data, using various techniques of the personal interview, and testing interests and aptitudes. So, those are the two definitions of those words. And I want to start off by saying just a very few important statement things. Doctors, well, for the sake of this episode, counselors, therapists, they don't heal. Even incredible counselors, therapists who love Jesus and have been doing therapy for 30 years, they don't heal people. God heals people. And I'm going to give you an example from an article that I actually read from Relevant Magazine. I'll leave the link to it in the information bar below so that you can read it for yourself. And I thought that this was such a good example. The example that they put was, think of it this way. If you break your arm and go to a doctor, they'll give you x-rays, a cast, and send you on your merry way. Now, if you're like me, you'll be tempted to assume that the doctor just fixed your arm. However, as you walk out of that doctor's office, your arm is still as broken as when you went in. The only difference is that now your arm is in a much more favorable posture for fusing back together, which is where God comes in. Inside your arm, an imperceptibly small yet miraculous event is occurring. Your bones are natural healers. At the location of the fracture, your bones will produce lots of new cells in tiny blood vessels that rebuild the bone. These cells cover both ends of the broken part of the bone and close up the break until it's as good as new. That is God's handiwork. What's happening inside your broken and now fusing arm is nothing short of miraculous. And while the doctor gets credit for aiding in the onset of that miracle, when it really comes to the healing, the wellness, the regeneration, God's doing that on a microscopic level as you go about your day. part of the beautiful and amazing work that counselors do is that they invite people into the story that God is writing in the patient's life, whoever they may be. A good counselor doesn't think that they're a great healer or even an expert on everything. They think they're the luckiest person in the room because they're about to witness God doing some pretty remarkable things. So to think that there's some general truth that counselors are somehow taking the place of God not only diminishes God, but really makes counseling something that it's not. And again, this is an excerpt from an article called "Going to Therapy Doesn't Mean You Have a Lack of Faith" from Relevant Magazine. I will again put the link below so that you guys can check it out for yourself. But when I came across this article, I thought it was just the perfect description of the way that God at the end of the day is doing the healing work. Like the counselors and therapists, they are merely a tool that is aiding in the healing work of God inside the person's mind. And like the example that they gave with the broken arm, because the healing doesn't just automatically happen like you put a cast on it, like you get medicine, you're good. The healing happens on a microscopic level on the inside. And so when it comes to therapy, when it comes to counseling, the work is going on the inside of your mind. So I'll give an example with myself. I received DBT therapy, which is dialectal behavioral therapy. It is very similar to a more common form of therapy called CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. But there's a lot more work that is involved, a lot more work called emotional irregulation. Now, like I've said before, my diagnosis is borderline personality disorder, depression, and anxiety. And so the way that I would describe my borderline personality disorder is actually two ways that I would describe it. The first way that I would describe it is like a revolving door of constant in and out emotions going in and out of my mind in a very short time span. So I would hope that you've seen a revolving door or know how a revolving door works. So let's say, for example, the emotion sadness is coming in through the revolving door. And revolving doors are there. Well, some of them are not super fast. Well, they're not supposed to be super fast because you don't want to risk injuring yourself when you're trying to like exit or enter whatever building you're trying to get into. But in my brain, it's going really, really fast. It's going fast to where I'm not able to keep up with the emotions that are going in and out of my brain. So, like I said, for example, let's say sadness is coming into my brain. And before I can even try to catch it, it leaves. And then as soon as sadness leaves, anger comes in. As soon as anger leaves, loneliness comes in. As soon as loneliness leaves, happiness comes in. As soon as happiness leaves, confusion comes in, and so on and so forth. And that is the cycle that is continually going on inside my brain. And the second way that I would describe my BPD is it's like a disorganized file cabinet. It's a disorganized file cabinet. And I say that because everything has its place, but it's in the wrong place. And everything has a specific set of information, but it's the wrong information. Everything is jumbled up, everything is pieced together in ways that it shouldn't be, and I try to put it back together, but then as soon as I put it back together, it falls apart again. That is what my examples that I would use of what it's like for me to have borderline personality disorder. Now, with the type of therapy that I receive, again, it's called dialectal behavioral therapy, DBT for short. We do a lot of different exercises and practices for emotional regulation. So one example of a practice that I'm doing is actually in this like huge textbook that me and my therapist use. Workbook, not a textbook. It's a workbook. one exercise that we are doing currently is that I would write down a specific situation that I either went through in the past or I'm going through currently. And I write down the first emotion that comes up for me, which is usually kind of a negative one. Well, emotions are only negative depending on how you respond to that emotion. I'll say that. Emotions are only negative depending on how you respond, how you act on that emotion. That is what makes an emotion or feeling negative, because there's actually no such thing as a bad feeling, as a bad emotion. Anyway, so let's say, for example, I went through a situation that made me feel extremely angry, and I wanted to act out in my anger in a way that wouldn't have helped me. So I have to think of an opposite way for me to either act out in that emotion or to replace it with an emotion that is more positive. So that is one exercise that I do. And obviously, me writing it down or me trying to practice it in the moment, it's not gonna automatically click in my brain that, oh, this is the right thing to do. This is what I should do from now on. It's not gonna happen like immediately, like a 180 in that split second. It takes time. Therapy and counseling, it requires a lot of work. It takes time for people. Also, depending on who the person is, what type of work that needs to be done in them. But in that moment, it's like it's planting a seed, and God sees that seed. And so now, on an emotional and spiritual level, God is doing the work to help that seed grow, to where over time, it'll become second nature for me to act in a more positive and healthy way to situations that would normally have me feel extremely overwhelmed, extremely angry, so on and so forth. And I want to say that no person of the faith should be made to feel ashamed for seeking medical help for mental health / mental illness related issues, while also practicing and living in faith in God. Going to therapy, going to counseling, taking medication does not automatically mean that you have a lack of faith. It does not. And like with the example that I shared from the article, which again I will link below so that you guys can read it, and also with my own personal experience, that does not mean that I have a lack of faith. If anything, I am increasing my faith in God in reaching out to these tools, these resources that God has placed for us on this earth for a reason. Now, I shared in a previous episode that the world that God created, He obviously didn't create it to be this dark and kind of helpless world that it is today. And there are certain things that came along with it when the fall of man happened. One of those things being mental health, mental illness issues, and things of that nature. Now, that doesn't mean that God didn't have like a backup plan, that He didn't know what to do. So what did God do? He had people who were gifted in science, people who were gifted in the chemical makeup of the brain, chemistry, biology, to be able to make medication that helps people with mental health and mental illness issues. He had people who were passionate about how the brain works, about the social emotional level of how people act, therapists, psychiatrists, counselors. And all these tools I am able to use to act on the faith that I have in God, that I can and will be whole again, mentally, on a mental, emotional level, and even a physical level too, because the mental, emotional health affects you in a physical way as well. It's everything, it's all connected. And going to therapy and taking medication, it shouldn't be it shouldn't be judged, it shouldn't be criticized. Like, it doesn't automatically mean that it's like, so you don't believe that God can heal you, you don't believe God can do this. Like, yes, God can heal me. God is healing me through therapy. Like, I can literally say that God is healing me through therapy, because there has been so many, first off, let me just point out that the therapists that I have are Christian. My psychiatrist is not Christian, but it was like not a coincidence that I got the psychiatrist that I have, because she's been very helpful in my journey when it comes to like the type of medication that I take. But my therapists are Christian, and they're also 2 Black women. My psychiatrist is also a woman of color. She is Arabic. She's Arabic, yes. Because I thought it was just personally important for me to have people who were 1, female, and 2, people of color, because I could just relate to them more on that level. But anyway, back to what I was saying. But yeah, that I am acting in faith by using these resources and tools that God created for a specific purpose, because God wouldn't just have these careers that people have like for no reason. Like, that just it it really wouldn't make any sense. To close out this episode, I wanted to give some facts about therapy that you probably didn't know about, and also share some things in the Bible, what it talks about counseling, not therapy, because again, the term therapy isn't really mentioned in the Bible, but it does again talk about counseling, and counseling and therapy do coexist with each other. So, some facts about therapy is that 59 million Americans, 59 million, seek therapy each year. Now, the benefits of therapy go way beyond periods of crisis. You do not have to be in like a midlife crisis, and you also don't have to have a specific medical issue as far as mental health, mental illness going on with you to seek therapy. Many people want more than to be not depressed. Like, people want to have the happiest, most productive, most loving version of themselves as possible. Now, here's some facts about therapy. Therapy can reduce physical symptoms and boost your physical health by identifying painful emotions, and you can learn strategies to soothe your nervous system. Some physical symptoms that could happen when you're under stress are migraines, digestive problems, impaired sleep, a bad appetite, things of that nature. Another fact is that therapy can help you get out of survivor mode. It helps you to work on your goals and dreams and navigate potential internal and external obstacles while building your confidence and your resilience. Therapy can help you change unhealthy patterns and untangle years of confusion and turmoil. Number 4, therapy will give you a whole new perspective on other people while better understanding yourself. And number 5, therapy allows you to vocalize your jumbled up thoughts with a clear picture. And I like that last fact, because say if you want to become a better communicator, but you don't really know how, or you want to be more assertive instead of being on the aggressive or passive side, therapy is a great tool that you can go to, because you probably have all the right things to say in your head, but you don't know how to get it out. Therapy, again, is a great tool that can help you vocalize all those jumbled up thoughts in your head. It can help you come up with ways to vocalize that in a efficient and in a appropriate manner. when it comes to the Bible and what it says about counseling and therapy, well, mainly counseling, I know like the first thing that came to mind for me was Proverbs. If you're familiar with the book of Proverbs, it gives pretty much words of wisdom. Proverbs is a book that King David wrote to give words of wisdom to his son Solomon, who was well known in the Bible as being the wisest man in the Bible. And Proverbs talks a lot about having good counsel, having good people around you. And so I want to share a few of my favorite verses and give a bit of a description of what those verses mean and why they are so important. Proverbs 12 verse 15, this is the ESV version, reads, "The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man listens to advice." I personally love this verse, and I lean on this verse a lot, especially in connection to the type of therapy / counseling that I receive, is because the heart is a very deceitful thing. The Bible says that the heart is a very deceitful thing, and you cannot lean on it. You can't lean on your own understanding. That is also another verse in the Bible. That's also something the Bible says. And when it comes to how earlier, how I described how my BPD is, it is very hard for me to sometimes even know what I'm feeling in the moment, or to try to get a clear thought of what is consuming my mind at the moment. And with the type of therapy I receive, it is the equivalent to good advice. It is the equivalent to guidance, very good guidance that someone is giving me. Proverbs chapter 24 verse 6 Proverbs 24 verse 6 reads, "For by wise guidance you can wage your war, and in abundance of counselors there is victory." Now, I love the comparison of the fact that all the thoughts in my mind, it does feel like there is a war going on. It does feel like my mind is a battlefield. That's literally what it feels like. And it says, "For by wise guidance you can wage your war, and in abundance of counselors there is victory." So wise guidance, pretty much finding people who could be around you who are actually wise, who actually know what they're talking about. So who you put around you is what's going to determine the outcome of the war, the outcome of the help that you're going to be getting. And in abundance of counselors, there is victory. When you have many of those wise people around you, whether it be counselors, therapists, whoever it may be, you are destined to be in victory. Also, if you actually listen to their advice and make it a practice to do what they say to do, you will have victory. Proverbs chapter 19 verse 20 reads, "Listen to advice and accept instruction, that you may gain wisdom in the future." Now, this verse is pretty much self-explanatory. David in this verse is pretty much saying what you should do. You should listen to good advice and accept good instruction, that you may gain wisdom in the future. It's self-explanatory, because I don't know what else I could possibly add to that verse. Now, the last verse I'll share is actually not from Proverbs, it's from the book of James. It is James chapter 1 verse 19, and it reads, "Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, for anger does not bring forth the righteousness of God." Now, I included this verse here because, again, something that I struggle with BPD, a kind of a symptom of BPD is impulsivity. So I act on impulse, and the emotions that I feel them super, super, super strongly. Some people out there may call that being an empath, where you feel emotions very strongly. I don't want to get into that because I don't fully understand it, but yeah, with BPD, I feel my emotions very strongly, and they can overwhelm me. Now, I like this verse in relation to seeking good counsel, seeking good therapy, because the first thing it says is to be quick to hear. You should be quick to hear wise, helpful and correct instruction from those that actually want to help you, from those who are actually wise and know what they're doing. Slow to speak, meaning pause. Is what I'm about to say or what I want to say going to help me in this situation, or is it going to detriment my mental health in this situation? And to be slow to anger. And there is a good anger and there is a bad anger. A good anger I like to describe as like having like this passion. Like one example is how Jesus was in the temple when he was flipping tables. He had a righteous and passionate anger because he was angry about the fact that they turned a temple, a house of God, into a den of thieves and a marketplace. And so he was angry with kind of a good reasoning to be angry. And now the way he acted on it, there's people who will say that it's like, oh, Jesus didn't really act good on it. In my opinion, I think he did, because he drove out all those people who shouldn't have been in the temple in the first place, so that people can actually go to the temple to do what you're supposed to do in the temple, which is to worship and praise God. That is what you're supposed to do in the temple. A temple is not a marketplace. A temple is not a place where you sell merchandise and stuff like that. Like, come on now. But yes, to be slow to anger, because anger does not bring forth the righteousness of God. Now, a negative anger depends on, again, well, when it comes to any emotion, a bad emotion becomes a bad emotion by how you act on it. So, let's say, an example, when it comes to like a romantic relationship, you feel like you're not getting attention, so you decide to go find someone else, basically cheat. You acted out in anger, but the action you did was not a good action. And so that's going to lead to just a whole bunch of problems in your relationship, trust issues, and like all this other stuff. So that's an example I would use for that. Well, we have made it to the end of the episode. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode and want me to talk more about topics like this, please let me know. I will have like a little question box. Well, it'll pop up, I think, only on Spotify, where you can respond to a question I post. So you can ask me questions there. If you follow me on social media, Kintsugi Talks Pod, you can send me a DM there. You can interact with me there. And you can listen to this podcast on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. Please make sure to leave a good review. Please make sure to share this with friends and people who you know it'll benefit them to be able to hear a podcast like this. And again, I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next episode. Until then, God bless.